Well, good evening. My name is Jeffrey Smith, and it is my honor to serve as the chairman of the Parents in Science Initiative. And it's a particular pleasure to welcome you all to the spring program, our third and final event this year, hosted by Rockefeller University for parents in the New York City community. The university introduced the Parents in Science lecture series in 2007 as a resource for parents interested in gaining new insight into child and adolescent development. The program sponsors events that bring the university's distinguished scientists together with outside experts from fields such as psychology, medicine, education, and the social sciences. And we hope that by participating in these lectures, you will have the opportunity to meet leading scientists and learn about biomedical breakthroughs that are improving the health and well-being of our children, and also to engage in dialogue with other parents who have an interest in science and biomedical issues. We've been extremely happy about how enthusiastically the Parents in Science lecture series has been received by the community, and our audience has been growing steadily with each event, and as you can see tonight, I think we have the largest turnout we've had since the start of the series. Since the beginning of the program, many of you have conveyed your appreciation to the university for sponsoring these events, and many of you have also expressed an interest in supporting Rockefeller and asked how you can help. In response, the school launched the Parents in Science Discovery Fund as a way for the community to support the university. The fund has a dual purpose. The first is to support innovative research here at Rockefeller through the funding of Parents in Science graduate and postdoctoral fellowships. Second, the fund provides vital support for the university's extensive educational outreach initiatives for New York City area students and teachers. These initiatives include a holiday lecture series, participation by Rockefeller faculty in programs such as students modeling a research topic, and a very large summer research program for both high school students and science teachers. I am happy to announce that the Discovery Fund has already received over 100 gifts and has raised more than $220,000 to benefit the university. So thank you very much to all of you who have contributed to the fund. Your partnership is making a real difference in supporting one of the best biomedical research universities in the world, and will certainly help us to continue to improve and make the Parents in Science initiative an even better resource for parents in our community. If you'd like to help support the fund, please go to the Parents in Science website. The address is listed in the back of your programs. Now, a few words about Dr. Paul Nurse, Rockefeller University's 9th president. An internationally renowned cancer biologist, Paul, as perhaps you will tell by his accent in a few minutes, was born and educated in England. Immediately prior to coming to Rockefeller, he headed Cancer Research UK, the world's largest cancer research organization outside the United States. Since 2003, Paul has served as president of Rockefeller University. He is also a professor and head of the Laboratory of Yeast Genetics and Cell Biology, and he directs the university's Anderson Center for Cancer Research. The list of Paul's accomplishments and awards is rather too lengthy to go into much detail here, but a few of his recognitions stand out. In 1999, he was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II for his contributions to cancer research and cell biology. And 2 years later, he shared the Nobel Prize for Physiology or Medicine for discoveries regarding the genetics that control the division and shape of cells. This work has revealed many new possibilities in cancer treatments. Last week, Paul Nurse was honored again, this time by the Royal Society of London, which has nominated him to be its next president. The Royal Society dates back to 1660 and acts as the National Academy of Science of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth. Amongst his other duties, the president of the Royal Society acts as the independent advisor on science to the Prime Minister. We congratulate you, Paul, on joining a distinguished group of past presidents, a list of just 59 eminent scientists who include such luminaries as Christopher Wren, Isaac Newton, and Ernest Rutherford. Not a bad list. Unfortunately for us, this means that Paul will be leaving his presidential post at Rockefeller at the end of this calendar year. However, I am happy to report that the Royal Society actually doesn't seem to have lab facilities, so he will maintain his close ties to the university, and in particular will continue to maintain his laboratory here. While Paul's leaving is a great loss for Rockefeller, we recognize that his new job is the most distinguished position and honor that a British scientist can be granted. So with that, please join me in congratulating Paul on such a singular achievement.
Well, thank you, everybody, and good evening. Like Jeff, I'd like to welcome all of you. It's a great crowd this evening to this beautiful campus. And if you have some time when we finished our meeting, do have a little stroll around the campus. The azaleas are out. It's absolutely wonderful at the present time. Thank you, Jeff, also for your kind introduction. This has been quite a difficult week for me because I've been extremely happy here. And although the Royal Society presidency is a great privilege for me, it was very, very difficult to make the decision to step down from president of this great institution, which I've been privileged to serve for the last 7 years. I've greatly enjoyed living and working in New York and with the great community of scientists that we have here. And I've been very, very fortunate to have had the opportunity to come to know many of the university's trustees, friends, and generous benefactors. So I'm here with mixed emotions, I have to say. Now, I want to echo Jeff in saying how grateful we are that Parents and Science has raised nearly $220,000 in support of its initiatives during this academic year. We are very aware that as parents you have many commitments, and we really appreciate you including Rockefeller in your thoughts. Now, tonight's programme blends biology and psychology, and it goes to the heart of this university's mission, the pursuit of science for the benefit of humankind. Rockefeller was the first biomedical research institute of its kind in the United States. It was founded in 1901. Throughout this long history, over 100 years of course, this institution has made important contributions to biomedicine recognized throughout the world. I'll mention 3 of them. The discovery that DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, is the basic material of heredity, discovered here in Rockefeller. The understanding that cancer can be caused by a virus, discovered here in Rockefeller very early on, though not acknowledged by a Nobel Prize to over 50 or even 60 years later. The discovery of leptin, a key weight-regulating hormone, I know familiar to many of you, relatively recently, just over 10 years ago. 23 scientists associated with Rockefeller have won the Nobel Prize. That's really an extraordinary number for such a small faculty. We only have around 70 faculty here at any one time. 4 of those Nobel laureates received the prize in the past decade. But there are other metrics of the university's excellence that I want to mention. Last fall, President Obama awarded the National Medal of Science to Dr. Elaine Fuchs, the 14th university investigator to accept this honor. 20 Rockefeller scientists have received the Alaska Award, often a predictor of future Nobel Prize recognition. And very importantly, I believe, as a general measure of excellence, over 2/3 of our tenured faculty are members of the National Academy of Sciences here in the United States. Now, we have a very interesting program tonight. It's entitled A Parent's Guide to Boys and Girls, How Hormones Shape the Brain and Influence Behavior. Well, this is something I've always wanted to understand. Maybe I will understand it in an hour's time. And there is hope for that because we have 2 great guides this evening. Our featured speakers, Dr. Margaret McCarthy and Dr. MICHAEL THOMPSON. Both of them are parents, so I'm sure they draw on their own personal experience in their work. Our program will begin with presentations from both of them. Then I will come back up here and we will have from that table an interview-style conversation between the 3 of us, after which I will invite the audience to a question and answer session. So you'll have plenty of opportunity to participate and ask questions of our excellent speakers. Now, let me just introduce our speakers. In tonight's conversation, the biological perspective will be provided by leading neuroscientist Dr. Margaret McCarthy, Peg has made key discoveries about sex-related differences in the brain that influence personality and behaviour throughout childhood and adolescence and young adulthood. She is Professor of Physiology and Psychiatry at the University of Maryland School of Medicine. I'm also pleased to tell you that she began her career here at Rockefeller when she was a postdoctoral fellow working with Professor Don Pfaff in our Laboratory of Neurobiology and Behaviour. So welcome back. Our second speaker, Dr. MICHAEL THOMPSON, is a widely acclaimed clinical psychologist and school consultant who has written or co-authored a number of books on children and their families, including the New York Times bestseller entitled Raising Cain, Protecting the Emotional Life of Boys. He also wrote and narrated a PBS documentary of the same name, and in addition has been on a number of radio and television programs, including The Oprah Show, CBS 60 Minutes, and NPR's Talk of the Nation. We are both pleased and privileged to have these experts with us today to offer insights into the special qualities of boys and girls, insights that will help us understand our children a little better and perhaps help them reach their full intellectual and emotional potential. Now, no more of me. We're honoured to hear from Dr. Peg McCarthy. Please join me in welcoming her to the podium.
It's really a great honor and a thrill to be here today, and as Dr. Nurse mentioned, I was a postdoctoral fellow here, and the career development of a scientist is a very long and protracted process with many distinct phases, and being a postdoc is a whole lot like going through puberty. You have totally irrational cockiness, yet you have abject fear of criticism. And you have your extreme highs and deep lows. You're yearning for independence, yet you have no resources with which to clothe, feed, or house yourself whatsoever. And the Rockefeller creates the ideal environment for a person who's going through scientific puberty, because it does provide exactly the right balance of freedom, support, and gentle guidance. And I found that here, both in the mentorship of Don Pfaff and in many fruitful collaborations with Bruce McEwen. And so I'm so delighted to hear that resources are being put towards the training of young scientists, because you heard about all the great scientists that are here, but Rockefeller has also fledged many of us out into the community. And all of the young scientists I was here with are all successful, very active scientists today. So it's really wonderful to hear. Since I left Rockefeller, my research program has focused on a single question, which is how do steroid hormones act on the developing brain? And that's what I'm going to try to spend the next 20 minutes telling you about, to give you some sense of the amazing wonder of what these hormones can do to the brain. What I'm not going to talk about is why boys are good at math and girls are good at language or anything like that, but I'm happy to give you my opinion on those issues during the question and answer session. But what I want to do is we're going to stick to the biology and the science. So what are steroid hormones? The ones that we're going to talk about today are androgens and estrogens, which are synthesized by the gonads, and we tend to think of androgens as male and estrogens as females. And we all know that they give you big muscles and shiny hair and things like that. But the brain is a steroid-sensitive target tissue. The brain, in fact, sops up hormones like mad. And you should also be aware that testosterone is actually the unfinished product of estradiol. Estradiol is the sequential, the final, the penultimate hormone. So to get to femaleness, you have to go through maleness first when it comes to hormones. But actually, these two hormones are very closely related, very potent, and exert important effects on the brain. How they do that is different than any other drug, any other chemical in the body that we talk about, because they bind to a unique class of receptors called nuclear transcription factors. So like a lock and a key, the steroid hormone binds to the receptor, but what these receptors do that is different is they go to the nucleus, and this blue beaded necklace here is actually to represent DNA. And they bring along their friends, cofactors and the like, and they sit down on the DNA and they transcribe genes. This is gene expression. It doesn't matter what genes you have if your genes aren't expressed. And steroid hormones will express your genes. That means that they will make new proteins, right? So unlike a drug like cocaine or nicotine or caffeine that is in your body and then gone, steroids leave a lasting impression. In addition to this very powerful effect in the nucleus where they make mRNA and new proteins, we found, to our surprise, in the last decade or so, that they're much wilier than we thought. They have a multiplicity of actions, that they can bind to receptors on the membrane, they can activate enzymes called kinases, they can activate G protein-coupled receptors, and they can even activate ion channels, which are sort of the neurotransmitter receptors on the brain. So they're really keeping us busy figuring out all of the different ways that they can act, and there's lots of active research in this area at the moment. So how can we possibly understand how these hormones have effects on the brain? Well, to state the obvious, humans are complex and they are really, really difficult to experiment on. And I would say that when it comes to really understanding how hormones affect the brain, they are impossible. Because the minute that the gender of an individual is identified, which in the modern era is long before it's even born, with all of our ultrasound and everything, it is assigned a gender. It is a male or female. The nursery is painted blue. A gender-specific name is assigned. So the power of culture and society and parental expectations and experience are overwhelming, and we simply can never dissect them out. So if there's a biology in there, it's confounded by all of these other experiences. So myself and many other scientists have decided that if we're going to really understand societal and cultural and experiential influences, we need to understand what is biological and what is not influenced by those variables. And so for that, we turn to animal models. And much of the definitive work was done here at Rockefeller. Back in the 1970s, Fernando Nautaban and his student at that time, Art Arnold, described one of the first major sex differences in the brain, the song control nuclei of the male zebra finch. Bruce McEwen was the first to report steroid receptors in the brain, and he articulated the aromatization hypothesis and many other foundations. Don Pfaff was actually the very first in 1966 to report any kind of morphometric sex difference in the brain, and has gone on to have an entire career focusing on this topic with elegant genetic studies and mechanistic studies to this day. My favorite animal model is the laboratory rat, in part because of the depth of knowledge that we have about it. It's been studied for more than 50 years. It breeds readily in the laboratory, and it shows sexually dimorphic brain and behavior. So when we talk about sex differences in the brain, we first talk with what are our definitions. So everybody has XX or XY that determines, we think of it as determining your sex, but all it's really doing is determining your gonads. So the males have an XY. They have a single gene called SRY for sex-determining region of the Y chromosome, which will code the bipotential gonad to become a testis. If SRY is not present, the bipotential gonad becomes an ovary. From there, we determine brain sex. So the testis is going to make testosterone, which is going to be converted in the brain to estradiol, just shows one hormone, and then that is going to convert the brain into a male brain. In the absence of those hormones, we're going to have a female brain. And the reason that we know that those hormones are directing that male brain is because we can give the testosterone to the female and make her brain male. She still has ovaries, she still has all of the normal secondary sex characteristics of a female, but she will have a male brain. So when is this occurring? Well, we can find out when this is occurring by experimenting across the lifespan on rats. And what we have discovered is that, contrary to what you might think at first, that hormones only come on after puberty, there's actually a period in late gestation and around birth when testosterone levels are very, very high. And then they go down, and they stay down through weaning and juvenile period, and then they don't come back up again until puberty. So the testis embryonically is making testosterone. This is true in humans as well. A newborn human baby boy has a circulating testosterone of a 25-year-old adult, and it will stay that way for a couple of months, and then it will go down and not to reappear for a decade or so later. Sometimes the longer the better when you have an 11-year-old son. So what is this early hormone effect doing? Well, what we know is what we call it's organizing the brain. As far as we know, the only reason it's there for is to organize the brain into the male phenotype, which will then be activated upon in adulthood. And this all occurs during a sensitive period. So it's a restricted developmental window, and we define the sensitive period by knowing that if we give testosterone injections to a female during this time, we can convert her brain into male. But if we go outside this sensitive window, she's impervious to it. She will forever be female for the rest of her life. So where do steroids affect the brain? This is a rat brain turned on its side. This is a sagittal section. You can tell it's a rat brain because it has a huge olfactory bulb and a smooth cortex. You'd see the opposite in a human brain, small olfactory bald, wrinkly cortex. And the major place that we see very robust and reliable and relevant sex differences is in the hypothalamus, because this is the brain region that's controlling reproductive physiology and sex behavior. So naturally, that's where the biggest differences lie. But we also see sex differences in other areas, such as the hippocampus, and this is a brain region that controls cognition and emotion. I'm not trying to say that these are the only two brain regions that have sex differences, many others do, but to already introduce the idea that different parts of the brain are doing different things and hormones are acting differently in the different parts of the brain. So the brain is not the liver, where one lobe is pretty much the same as the next. Every address, every neighborhood is completely unique in the brain, and so are the effects of the hormones on the brain. So how do we study these hormone effects on the brain and behavior? Well, we use our laboratory rats, as we said, and we can watch their behavior, and we can ask questions about their behavior regarding their maleness and their femaleness. And we can watch how mothers interact with their pups. We can watch how juveniles play. What you're going to see here is these are boys. There's no doubt these are boys. And this is a girl over here cleaning her face, paying attention. And then these are also boys, because they're fighting, but they're older boys. And then over here we have adults who have another type of play that they engage in, which is their mating behavior. And in rodents, it's a very little escape behavior here as well. What you see is this typical: the male mounts the female, and she shows this lordosis posture. We'll see if we can get one more round here. Yeah, so that's classic rats having fun. Now, actually, though, you must think this is a male and a female rat. It's actually not. It's actually two females. And the one that's behaving like the male is one whose brain we turned into a male brain when she was a baby. So we injected her with, actually not testosterone, but we made her into a male when she was young. So we can also visualize entire brain regions. This is the hippocampus, and we can stain for different proteins, so it can tell us what kind of neurons are there and what they're doing. And then we can look and see if there are sex differences in their overall size. Hippocampus controls cognition and emotion, shows a slight sex difference, being slightly larger in males. More famous sex differences are things such as the sexually dimorphic nucleus, which has the rather obvious name because it is so much larger in males. These are coronal sections through the brain. All these little grainy black dots are neurons, and this is the SDN here in the male. And you can see he has many, many more of those little black dots than the female does. And down here on the bottom is a female that was given testosterone when she was young. So again, that's converting her brain into male. There's an analogous nucleus to this in the human brain called ENA3. These are the interstitial nuclei of the anterior hypothalamus, and here, as you can see, it is in the male versus the female. We don't know about hormonal responsiveness because we don't give hormones to humans when they're babies. We do know, though, how this comes about mechanistically, and it's quite interesting how it does occur, which is that this is that SDN, and both males and females start with the same number of neurons at birth, but then the male gets estradiol, and he gets it from his testosterone, remember, because he converts it into estradiol, and because the female doesn't get that, her neurons start to die, and what's called pre-programmed cell death. And so by the time they're grown up, he's kept all the neurons. His nucleus is 5 to 7 times larger than hers because her cells died off. This is true in other parts of the brain, in the spinal cord, and sometimes the female keeps the cells and they die off in the male. But this is a common mechanism it's an interesting way that Mother Nature chose to build a sexually dimorphic brain, was give everybody everything and then take it away from half of them. We can also observe individual neurons and glia. These are hippocampal neurons stained by Catherine Woolley, who was a graduate student here at Rockefeller with Bruce McEwen. And these are glia, this glean fluorescent cell here. This is the supporting cells of the brain. And this was done by Jessica Mong, who was a postdoc here at the Rockefeller with Don Pfaff. We can also even count individual synapses so that we can really understand how the neurons are communicating with each other. As you know, the brain is made up of neural circuits. The neurons have to connect each other. So an axon has to come in and synapse on a dendrite. And fortunately for us, it tends to do that on these little protuberances that we quite obviously named spines, because they stick out like little spines. And these are the sites of excitatory synapses, and they're handy because we can count them. And when we do that, we can find profound differences in males and females in the numbers of these dendritic spines. And so these are just dendrites from individual neurons in males and females' brains. And you can see this is what they really look like on these kind of these little hairy protuberances. Maybe we could dim the lights here a little bit for this in the next couple slides. And you can see that the male has many, many more than the female. In fact, he has almost twice as many in this particular brain region. There's other brain regions, again, where the relationship is the opposite. I want you to think the males are always getting all the goodies. Sometimes the females has more than the males. Also, those astrocytes can be sexually dimorphic, and we can visualize them by staining for a particular protein called GFAP, and then we can trace these processes. And what we've seen is that females have these very simple astrocytes, and males have these very complex astrocytes in a continuum. So even the morphology of even these support cells can be profoundly different in some parts of the brain between males and females. We can take neurons and we can put them in a dish, and we can take them from a male brain and we can take them from a female brain, and we can say, are you going to behave differently in a dish? And we can do things like wash on different chemicals, and we can watch, we just seen there's a calcium flux in these astrocytes, and over here are some neurons that are going to be excited by different chemicals, and we can ask who gets more calcium coming in, the males or the females, and we have seen, in fact, differences in the responses even in the dish. We can even watch them grow over many hours or even days. And so could we please get the lights down for this next one in the front? So what we're seeing here are these are neurons in a dish that are growing over 2 days. And they're filled with a luminescent chemical so that we can visualize them. And you can see that there's a whole lot that's going on with these cells. I'm sorry, I could watch this all day. It's just amazing. It's amazing. These are neurons in a dish. And this is what they're doing. And they're gorgeous. They're just fantastic. And you can see they're sprouting little spines and everything. There's other neurons around. They're not alone. But we can only see one at a time. And we can ask questions about are male neurons different from female neurons. So from these types of studies, we have learned a great deal about how steroids act on the brain. And I'm just going to give you quick 3 little animations where we've worked out in great detail the cellular cascade of events that's going to occur to give us this sexually dimorphic morphology. So the first is a working model of estradiol-induced decreases in synapses in the arcuate nucleus, which is a brain region that controls the pituitary. So first, testosterone has to fall out of the sky, where it's going to get aromatized to estradiol. It's going to bind to its transcription factor, which is a nuclear transcription factor, and from there it's going to translocate into the nucleus, where it's going to interact directly with the DNA. And it's going to transcribe the gene glutamic acid decarboxylase, or GAD, which is the rate-limiting enzyme to make the neurotransmitter GABA. GABA is going to be released from the neuron. It's going to act on the neighboring astrocyte, or glia, and it's going to cause it to grow and branch and become more complex, and in doing so is going to suppress the formation of those dendritic spines. And that's how the male has fewer dendritic spines in this area than the female does. If we just take 2 steps sideways and go to the preoptic area, a critical brain region for controlling male sex behavior, we see a completely different sequence of cellular events. Again, though, we start with testosterone falling out of the sky, converted to estradiol by the neuron. It's going to bind with the same receptors as it did in the other brain region, go to the nucleus, and transcribe the gene cyclooxygenase. Cyclooxygenase makes prostaglandins, which you know of what gives you a fever or gives you pain and aches and pains, but it also acts in normal brain development. Prostaglandins actually activate receptors called EP2, which make cyclic AMP, which activate protein kinase A, which cause AMPA receptors to cluster, and then we get glutamate released from the astrocytes, which activates these AMPA receptors and causes the formation and stabilization of dendritic spines. So males in this brain region, they get more dendritic spines through this completely separate mechanism. And then and notice in both of those 2 brain regions, we had 2 cell types. We had neurons and astrocytes, and a very intricate dance between the 2. This other brain region breaks all the rules and does something completely different, and this is in the hypothalamus, and this is the critical brain region for female sex behavior. Again, we start with the testosterone. It's going to be converted to estradiol. It's going to bind to the same nuclear receptor, but now it's actually going to avoid the nucleus, because it's got a different trick up its sleeve, which is going to activate an enzyme called protein kinase 3, PI3 kinase, sorry, and this little low level of glutamate is going to be massively increased, and we're going to bind to NMDA receptors, which is going to activate another enzyme, MAP kinase, phosphorylation of ERK, production of spinophyllin, and we're going to get both dendritic spines and new branches growing in this brain. So what we've just seen are unique cellular mechanisms by which steroids alter specific regions of the developing brain and change adult behavior. I didn't show you all the behavioral data, so I don't want to bury you in data. But these are just some examples. We have another brain region where I told you cell death was the name of the game. We have another brain region, the hippocampus, where it's really neurogenesis. And males make more neurons than females. We give the females testosterone. They look just like the males. Not to be outdone, though, females in the amygdala, important brain region for emotion, females make more neurons than males, and to our surprise, this is actually regulated by the brain's own marijuana endocannabinoids. We found out that the brain is a gonad. This just completely shocks us. We thought the gonads were enough, but no, it turns out the brain needs more and more and more, and it makes its own steroids. And this is a very exciting new area that we're still trying to understand, but it locally makes its own steroids. And then lastly, steroids exert epigenetic effects. When they interact with that DNA, they also leave behind permanent marks. They methylate the DNA, and this can have part of the reason why it has enduring consequences across the lifespan. So different regions, different functions, different mechanisms. These are a few. I could list on and on and on, and you're saying, why is she going on and on and on? I don't really care. And the reason is because of nonsense like this. So this was the cover of Scientific American in 2005. And this postulates that there is such a thing as his brain versus her brain. This is nonsense. Everything I just told you says that this is nonsense because we have so many different ways that steroid hormones are acting on this highly complex organ that there's no way that there's such a thing as one total male brain and one total female brain because there's too much variability. There's too much action going on. So instead we need to think of it as a mosaic. Some parts of the male brain are really, really male and some part tend maybe a little female. And likewise, some parts of the female brain are really, really female and others are a little bit male and some might be a whole lot male. And it's understanding what these are and then how culture influences on top of them that are important challenges of the future. So this research is funded by the National Institutes of Mental Health, and you might also say, why do they care? What does this have to do with mental health? Of all the various variables that predict your relative risk of coming down with a neurological disorder or being diagnosed with a disease of mental health, gender is the strongest one. So boys have a 3-to-1 ratio of autism. Recently it's been up to 4 when you include autism spectrum disorders. Dyslexia is 3-to-1 boys to girls. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, 10-to-1 boys to girls. Certainly there's a cultural influence in there, but there's probably a biological one as well. When we look at women, anorexia, stunning 13-to-1 women to men, anorexia, bulimia, 3-to-1 women to men, the whole cohort of affective disorders, depression, obsession, panic, anxiety, worldwide, 2-to-1 women to men. And schizophrenia is one name for many diseases. Early onset schizophrenia is highly biased towards boys, 3-to-1. Late onset schizophrenia, very strongly biased, 6-to-1 women to men. The reason I've been saying boys versus women is not to be derogatory, but instead because all of those male bias disorders are disorders of development. They are onset disorders. And in a very, very simple way, sort of explaining to grandma over the Thanksgiving turkey what you're doing your research on, these are disorders of wiring. Very simple, but it's a good moniker. Whereas if we look at the females' disorders, the high risk of adult onset disorders, these are very frequently disorders of neurochemistry. And so that's why we need to understand the basic biology of the development of sex differences in the brain. And then the last point that I sort of started with is that all of this research comes about because of the hard work of trainees. And when you're thinking about supporting research, it's getting harder and harder for young people to choose this as a career. They're getting more and more discouraged. And we have to keep the pipeline full if we're going to continue to make major discoveries in the future. So I thank you very much for your attention, and I'll turn it over now to... I guess he'll...
Thank you, Peg. That was absolutely terrific. Wow. I'm a little breathless from it. I'm also honored to be at Rockefeller University and a little intimidated the way social scientists are by real scientists. And I would never have agreed except Peg and I did a radio show together and found we were very much on the same wavelength, that we were certainly centrists and we didn't take positions about the male brain and the female brain and generalize. And I have a number of people in my field who are doing so in a way that dismays me. In fact, when we had a preparatory phone call, at the end of it, Peg said to me, just as she finished, here, she said, there's no such thing as the unitary male brain, unitary female brain. She said, but as the mother of an 11-year-old boy and a 10-year-old girl, I sure believe in gender. I am also the father of a daughter and a son, and I spend all day working with lay people, teachers, who are speculating constantly about the male brain and the female brain because they have little boys and little girls with them all day long. And when the boys wrestle, they worry about the aggression. And they actually think about testosterone. Is this testosterone? Do boys have to do this? Are they hormonally driven to do this? Can I stop it? Are they, They're asking questions about hormones in the brain all the time, many of which I cannot answer. I'm not well trained in the neurosciences. But people are always asking me about that behavior you saw in rats. I have some of that in boys. I'm going to show you in a second. Because we come from the most violent nation in the industrialized world, boys play. The fact that boys write different stories from kindergarten on. 5-year-old girls write stories about, the polar bear and the unicorn and the horse met in the park and they all went home for sleepover. And boys are much more likely to write a story that is, there was a horse and the unicorn who were best friends, and an old man killed the horse and the unicorn killed the old man, and the unicorn lived happily ever after. And teachers don't, do I ban this, violent writing? Do I ban violent play? I don't want my boys to grow up to be an aggressive and dangerous. What is my role? What is their biology? What must I accept? Their high level of activity? Teachers are thinking about brain differences all the time, and as the research from the hard sciences come to teachers, they think, am I unwittingly teaching to the girl brain? How do I teach to the boy brain? And this is a question of great import, because when I graduated from high school in 1965, 58% of college graduates in the United States were young men. Mainly a select group of young white men, like me. There are now many more college graduates, and they're a much more diverse group of people. But very soon, within a year or two, they will be 60% young women. The pendulum, in terms of education, has swung all the way from the male side to the female side. Girls began to outperform boys in school across the board, or on average in 1982. They pulled even in math and science in 2003. There are more girls taking pre-calculus, advanced science, and APs than boys. Girls are outperforming boys in elementary school, middle school, high school, college, and graduate school. 56% of the graduate degrees are going to young women. Nice, all right. And while I celebrate it, I understand that applause. It's baffling to teachers, and teachers don't know what to do. The average 11th grade boy in the United States writes at the level of the average 8th grade girl. I've been around long enough. I cut my teeth in the time of the women's movement, the feminist revolution, and in 1971, when the National Assessment of Educational Progress was given, a so-called Nations Report Card was given for the first time, there was a huge gap between boys and girls in math and science. And I watched a generation of teachers attack that and bring boys and girls even, as I say, girls pulled even in math and science, not in professorships in science, technology, engineering, and math. If you want to read a wonderful discussion of that, there's a wonderful, great new book out called The Mathematics of Sex, about why girls perform so well in school but don't perform or don't take the kinds of positions toward which they seem to be entitled. But I digress. Okay? I want to introduce you to the classroom. I was in fact, a school all day. I answered questions from teachers this afternoon. I ran a faculty meeting, and I answered questions about boy roughhousing and boy aggression. So let me introduce you to a boy from my PBS documentary named Kevin.
I like school. Some stuff are pretty fun to do. Some stuff are somewhat hard. It's kind of hard and it's boring. Isn't it fixed? It's like hard to concentrate.
The question restated in your answer, please.
I'd probably think it's easier for girls.
First three on page.
It might be easier for girls because sometimes the teachers favor girls.
Draw out the triangles and show me your work.
Most of the teachers are girls, and some teachers don't like boys because they think they're like mean and nasty.
And people say like boys are like bad and girls are like so nice.
You know, it's tough being a boy in school. By ages 10 and 11, girls perform equally well as boys in math and science, and much better in reading and writing. Boys are still less emotionally mature, more physically active, and more impulsive.
Andrew? Yes? That's not working.
I know.
That leads many boys to conclude that school is a place where the deck is stacked against them.
All right. I'll come back.
But, as we shall see, an understanding teacher can help change that attitude.
Kevin is a very charming boy. Absolutely. Maybe. I'll think about it tonight, I said. Okay? When I got a haircut one day, the next day, boy, Mr. O'Terry, you look good today. He's funny. He's energetic. I think he will be mayor of Melrose someday.
Melrose is a middle-class, mostly white community outside Boston. At the Lincoln School, Mr. O'Terry's fifth grade class has 14 boys and 5 girls. Nationally, boys account for 70% of the D's and F's given out at school.
Morgan.
It's half of a rectangle.
Why the difference? Well, what's school all about? School's mostly about sitting down and listening to an adult talk.
Our formula is 1/2 times the base.
For boys like Kevin, that can be very hard to do.
6, because 6 is the base, times 5, the height. Kevin and I have had challenging days. Base is 6, height is 5, 1/2 times. He does have a hard time focusing. Now, what's our formula for area of a triangle again, Kevin?
5 and 6.
What's the formula? How do we figure it out? And when he does get distracted, it definitely takes away from what he has to get done. Hold on.
Last year, Kevin's distractibility caused his grades to fall. He got mostly C's, and he sometimes disrupted class.
And Kevin?
See the L.
Homework.
What?
Take out your homework. Max? Kevin is a handful.
What? They're videotaping me drink.
Kevin may push things to an extreme, but his energetic behavior is typical for boys his age. So it's no surprise what boys say they like most about school.
Gym. Recess. I like lunch.
Snack. That's pretty much it.
30 years ago, elementary schools offered recess twice a day. Boys got a chance to work off their physical energy. But there's only one recess at Kevin's school to make more time for classes. Some schools are even eliminating recess altogether. I believe that's a real mistake. Boys in particular need more recess, not less, to become more effective students.
Adam, you haven't read yet? Okay, hold on. I'll get to you. What's your question, Jess?
All too often, this behavior gets labeled as a disorder. Now, there's no denying that some boys do have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. In fact, they're nearly 3 times more likely than girls to have ADHD. But when almost 85% of the world's stimulant medication gets prescribed to American boys, we have to ask the question, are we medicating boys because they're sick or because they're boys?
I have mixed feelings on it. As an educator, I've seen it work wonders with kids. You can see with some kids when they're not on the medication and when they are on the medication. It's very clear. As a parent, I have a different feeling about it. I don't know if I'd want my son or daughter having to take a pill every day.
Thank you. And you said 10 to 1 ADHD. Yeah, it depends on the study. So how many of you want Kevin on medication? It's a tough question. When I play this film clip for high school students and I ask the question, about 6 boys raise their hand. They say, if I'm on medication, he should be on medication. Look, that there are brain differences has never been a mystery to me. All you have to do is watch a second grade assembly when they ask the kids to sing a song, and you've got 6 girls who've learned the entire song standing shoulder to shoulder delivering it, maybe 1 or 2 boys standing slightly apart singing the song, and you have a whole bunch of boys wandering around looking dazed and going, hi, Mom. Hi, Mom. And it's never been a mystery to me that there's different arcs of development. Of course there are different arcs of development. What is it that every 7th grade boy hears 5 times a day from 7th grade girls? They're so immature. They're so immature. Girls are not fooled. And the question that we have to ask ourselves as a practical matter is whether we are under the pressure of globalization, under the pressure of No Child Left Behind, under the pressure of anxious parents who need their children to read in kindergarten so they can have some faith that they're going to be turn out to be all right when college is so competitive these days, right? So they're watching, or they're saying, a mother said to me about her kindergarten son, I got him a reading tutor. And I said, she said, I said, were there any specific problems or any signs of a potential learning disability? She said, no, I just didn't want to fall behind. So what is it that we're doing to boys? And what is it we're doing for girls? How has this come about? There are many people. I have a number of colleagues, Leonard Sachs, who wrote Why Gender Matters, and Michael Gurian, The Minds of Boys, who are saying that boys' brains are totally different. I think they're out beyond their data. Because there's no such thing, as you heard, as the boy brain or the girl brain. I believe if you gave every psychological test that could be given to girls, they would fall out, of course, on a bell-shaped curve, everything human does. If you gave the same tens of thousands to tests to boys, they would fall out on a boy bell-shaped curve. And if you superimposed one on the other, they'd be 85-90% overlapping. But what we identified as male or female is often the shoulders, those parts that stick out, the most active boys, the most quiet and sweet girls, huh? And but where the overlap is enormous. And we know as another matter that if you took 2 girls at random and under their bell-shaped curve and compared them one against the other on any trait, those 2 girls would be more likely to be different one from the other than girls are different from boys. Any 2 boys are more likely to be different one from the other than boys are different from girls. In statistical language, that's within group variance is greater than between group variance, right? Individual human temperament rules. We're all more human than we are gendered. Individual variation rules. But if you go to the top of those bell-shaped curves and you drop the dotted lines down, you get the average girl and the average boy. From an educator or a school consultant's point of view, there are 3 ways in which they differ that are quite striking. One is that their boys are so much more physically active. And of course, their experience in school is therefore different. Girls seem to be more effective processors of language. They come into school usually ahead of boys in language, and they enter an environment which is language rich. The elementary school classroom is 4/5 language based. So is the game rigged? And finally, for boys, one-on-one dominance, a particular kind of competitiveness, appears more salient. Or at least boys lead with it. I can run faster than you. I can do that faster than you. I can do that. I'm better at this than you. And in the cooperative, language-rich elementary school classroom, many boys find it stifling, and it used to be that 97% of elementary public schools in the United States had a meaningful recess. Since No Child Left Behind, that number is now down to 60%. We are pinning boys inside, and they are restless and fidgety, and they do not find the education is going to be a route for expressing themselves as boys and men. And they're fighting us. And they're looking like Kevin. Well, you know, when I show this film with my friend, my dear friend, Ned Hallowell, wrote Driven to Distraction and Answers to Distraction, I asked the audience, should Kevin be on medication? Ned always says, of course, Michael. I mean, he's one of mine. Come on. He's one of mine. His day in school would be so much easier if we gave him some stimulant medication. But what I know filming this film with some top documentary filmmakers from Powderhouse Productions in Somerville, Massachusetts, I always had a producer, an assistant producer, a first cameraman, a second cameraman, and a sound guy. All of them totally identified with Kevin. And I also know when I show this film to teachers, I was showing it to 600 teachers in Nashville, Tennessee, and my narrative voice comes on and says that in the 5th grade at the Lincoln School, there are 14 boys and 5 girls. There is a collective groan from the teachers, which lends some support, I think, to the idea that some people see boys as disruptive and essentially antithetical to the mission of schools. If you make girls the gold standard, boys will withdraw because it's not a developmental race they can win. They'll wait to get out into business when there's a different kind of reward structure. They will wait to get into a different kind of learning environment. And as a psychologist, I have seen many of those boys. But I think I've said enough, and we should go and have this conversation, don't you think? Thank you.
Thank you, Peg. Thank you, Michael. Great couple of talks. I think we're going to have some great discussion. I'm going to start with Peg, actually. No such thing as a boy brain, no such thing as a girl brain. So how do they differ? What is the difference?
Yeah, well, that is the $6 million question, isn't it? And I would be afraid to say right now, but except where I know they really, really different is in reproduction, because after all, there's been, millions of years of evolution to bring upon sex to make it different in males and females. And that's, in fact, nature abhors a vacuum. She wants to fill every niche, and that's why she made boys and girls and men and women, so we could fill every biological niche. So when it comes to drives associated with reproduction, they are, the bell curves don't overlap in the same way. But we as a species are, so if we were baboons all sitting here, we wouldn't be sitting here because about a quarter of the female baboons would be ovulating and all of the male baboons would be tearing each other's throats out to get at the females who are ovulating. So we've really changed the game. And I always say that the whole basis of human civilization is actually hidden ovulation. So it really comes down to women not letting the men know what's going on. But something as profound as reproduction is different. And then there's all these decorated things that go along with it. And they are, motivations, they are cognitive strategies. We know boys and girls learn differently. They can both learn, but how they learn is different. And we can do that in our rats as well. We can set up a paradigm that favors females to solve the task, and we can set up a paradigm that favors males to solve the task. What the neural underpinnings of that are, I can't tell you, but that's the kind of thing that we want to try to solve going forward.
Okay, let me have another go. This is really tricky. How much of gender-specific behavior is biological as opposed to cultural?
Look, between the ages of 3 and 4, children who've played together, boys and girls, without much reference to gender, begin to separate. This is seen all over the world. Girls withdraw from boy play saying they play too rough. Boys don't know they've been abandoned, okay? But they figure it out, and round about age 4, the boys become very forceful enforcers of gender exclusivity. We don't do that, that's girl stuff. Only girls do that. We don't do that. And boys play together. And boys and girls in free play choose to play with each other more and more and more and more. And they define themselves cognitively in their identity. I am a boy, therefore I do boy things. Therefore I watch men and boys to see what they do. And they begin to train themselves. They take cues from their play. And by 5th grade, now we're talking, 10, 11 years old. By 5th grade, boys and girls on the playground choose to play with the other gender about 0% of the time. Very shortly, they will get intensely interested in each other again. And Eleanor Maccabee, in her wonderful book, Two Sexes, Growing Up Apart, Coming Together, describes this. But all of the efforts of progressive educators to get elementary children to play together more and be more, more gender understanding and equity, all of them have very short-term effects that do not last. Boys and girls play apart. I believe, therefore, that they are training each other's brains. They are boys learn boy things, girls learn girl things, so that we train each other, and therefore our brains become more. There's a powerful cultural effect. And you can see it playing out with boys and girls, right?
Well, I think, sort of speaking to that, there's another example of excellent research done by Melissa Hines on children. And the beautiful thing about children who are about 4 to 7 years old is that hormones aren't involved. There's no hormones on board. So whatever you're seeing is the product of either early culture or early hormone exposure. And they use a two-way window, and they take children into a room so that they don't know that they're being watched, and they lay out all these toys. And some of them are very female-biased toys, some are very male-biased toys, and some are very neutral. And then they go behind the window and they watch the kids play. And they see. And by and large, boys will choose objects that have a lot of movement and sound and noise and stuff, and girls will choose things that are soft and they can play with. But the best predictor of their overall toy choice, outside of just being a male or a female, is whether or not you have a sibling of the opposite sex. So boys who are exposed to girl toys early on are more interested in girl toys, and boys and girls who are exposed to boy toys will show more interest. It doesn't, reverse them, it doesn't bring them into the middle, but it's the single biggest variable that falls out.
I'm going to ask the question that's dangerous for university presidents to ask. I sometimes call it the Larry Summers question.
Oh, dear.
So there are beliefs out there that males are better with numbers and spatial geometry and science. I mean, though we've heard difference here, girls better with language. I think you said, Peg, you'd be happy to talk about
I
that.
do have opinions about that, but partly because my own opinions have evolved so much as we've learned more about this, and so I used to be quite comfortable with was very robust data on spatial solving problems being much better in males than in females, and your ability to rotate an object in three-dimensional space, when those tests that you would get, and here's an object and here it is rotated 45 degrees, and which one matches up. And boys were always so much better, and I would always say to girls, and don't be intimidated by that. It's not like they study for it. It's not like they just can do it. But it turns out even something as profound as that has a lot to do with that test is biased towards the way that males see things spatially. They see things spatially different than females, but females do these things spatially. And in fact, if we go back in the literature, the animal literature, and look at, there's this test called the Morris Water Maze. You basically throw a rat in a pool and you say, swim for your life and find the platform. And and boys are universally considered, male rats are so much better, and this is considered the gold standard of a sex difference in better spatial ability in males. If you go back into the literature, the first study was on spatial learning in rats was published in 1922 by a woman named Jocelyn Ball, and in that study she cites that, this was the expected result that males would perform better because it's known that human males learn math skills better than human females. So there was a bias that was introduced into the literature in a reverse way from the human to the animal literature from the very beginning. In the last few years, as there's been more studies done on this, we found that, in fact, when you throw them in the pool and tell them to swim for their lives, the males have a very straightforward strategy in that they just swim across the water right to the platform and get on it and, shake themselves off. The girls say, there could be sharks out there. I see the platform, I know it's there, but I'm not going to swim out there. I'm going to go around the side, and then I'm going to sneak over and jump on the platform at the last minute. Well, that takes her longer. She knows exactly where it is, but the test performance is how long it takes you. So, in fact, we've been calling all these male rats smart when they're really not smart at all. They're swimming out amongst the sharks. So that's all a rather long-winded way of saying that. And
they're dumb. They haven't thought about the shark.
Exactly. So there's a lot of testing bias that goes on. There's clear gender differences in test anxiety. Females get more anxious, and that's probably biologically based to some degree. But the power of suggestion is so huge that I don't think we can even say right now that we know how strong the gender differences are in mathematical and spatial ability. It might come out in the end that you're right, that it's biologically there is a male brain that is better at certain spatial tasks, but I think we still need more information.
And we have to test for whether or not boys playing with blocks and Legos, in fact, gives them an early advantage in turning three-dimensional things in space, because they simply have more practice. And maybe because boys as a group play with blocks, they're getting a practice.
We say that, though, but we both know, having had boy and girl children, boys want to play with blocks and girls don't.
What's your explanation for that?
That's where I think the biology comes in. There is something inherent in the brain that is different, and that shouldn't shock us, because it doesn't mean that you don't have a career kind of thing, which is the Lawrence Summers. I mean, his remarks were so beyond the pale, including the idea that women didn't want to work hard. I said, do you know what a working mother is? And they weren't willing to commit 80 hours a week. For heaven's sakes, that would be a vacation.
Maybe this is having trouble up here, actually. Maybe this is related. What is it about teaching that's seen the improvement with girl performance? I mean, we have seen changes. What's the basis of that?
I've speculated with lots of teachers about it, and I've been giving a speech for years called Coming to Grips with Boy Underachievement or Girl Overachievement. In fact, almost all of the progress has been girls improving their performance. Boys have not fallen back, they're stagnant. And girls have passed them by. Is it because we're giving girls a clearer message? I talk to high school girls and they say, Yes, my mother's been saying, there was a girl in Atlanta who said to me, my mother's been saying that if you want to compete in a man's world, you have to work twice as hard, and because you're an African-American girl, you have to work 3 times as hard. And she is like many girls I've met who has a clear message. Maybe we're no longer able to give boys the message we once gave them. You need this so you can support your family. Maybe we don't know what to give, what to say to boys about masculinity. What I know is that as a psychologist, the boys are always looking for a way to express themselves as boys and men. And they often see school as a barrier to that. And girls often see school as a way to express themselves as girls and potential working women. And so boys often take their motivation outside of school to a team, and the fact that their fathers only come to athletic contests. You know, boys aren't stupid. Their mothers come to the PTA meetings, and their fathers come to all of their games. And so they're going to start to look for the opportunities to express themselves. We've had a loss, this is true over all of the industrialized world, we've had a loss of male teachers out of middle school. There's some preliminary research that the gender of your teacher may have an important influence on you, particularly in the middle school years as you're developing now a young woman's body or a young man's body. At the beginning of puberty, maybe the gender of your teacher is more salient. It makes a common sense to me. It needs more testing, I believe. But did I answer your question? I wandered.
Well, you're getting on with it, I guess. Yeah,
all right, sorry.
Do you want to add anything to this?
I like the idea about the different motivations of school, because I think some data that speak to that is that we always trot out the SATs, and it is still true that males outperform females on SATs in mathematics in the United States. But if we go outside of the United States, very interesting data, if we go to Japan, both males and females are the same, and they beat the pants off the Americans. They do extremely well in mathematics and the SATs. But if we go to Iceland, we see a reversal of the sex ratio, and that females outperform males in the math SATs. And you might say, well, why is that? Is that some genetic heritage of the Icelanders? But the explanation that the scientists brought to it was that the boys all know that I'm staying here in Iceland, and I'm going to be a fisherman. If I can count the fish, I'm good. You know, that's all I need to do. And the girls are all like, I got to get out of here. I don't want to marry a fisherman. And hence they do well on the SATs.
Right, I'm going to ask one more question, which I think... Then I'm going to give you guys a chance, actually. One more question, which I think will be of particular interest to this audience, and then I'd like those with the microphones to come down here, and we'll go around the audience. What's your opinion about single-sex schools?
Do you know what kind of schools Peg's daughter and son go to?
Not yet.
No. I just want to say, I think we ought to get this out front. I have a daughter and a son, both of whom went co-ed schools. And Peg's son and daughter go to single-sex schools. Yes. I am the psychologist for an all-boys school, but I didn't send my son there.
And I didn't start out that way, but in Baltimore, where I'm from, as Michael knows, is very heavily same-gendered schools, and we wound up with our son in an all-boys school, so we put our daughter in the all-girls school next to it. And I have very mixed feelings about it, but what I will say is that he gets 3 recesses a day.
All right.
Yeah. And what I do really see is all of the things that you were talking about. Those teachers say these are boys and they need to be like boys, and they celebrate their boyness and their activity and all this. So there's none of what you described. I still can't get my son to do his homework. And whereas my daughter is Miss Studious, she can't rest until it's done. So that, interestingly, that same gender bias still comes out. I get more upset at the girls' school, which yells at the girls for roughhousing and, your skirt is wrinkled and things like that, and which I feel that they're bringing more gender bias to the girls. I think that they can be very useful and serve their place, but of course, as we all know, when you're talking same-sex schools in this country, you're talking private school. Right. So if we had public schools that we could do same-sex, I think that that could be a wonderful, wonderful thing. And unfortunately, we don't seem to want to even have that discussion.
Look, I'm asked all the time because I'm a psychologist for an all-boys school. I think academic outcomes are so complex. Socioeconomic status, education of the parents, the morale of the teachers, the leadership of the schools, the resources. There's so many variables in play that gender turns out not to be the great predictor. And as you know, in New Zealand, in Australia, where they have single-sex public schools, they have to have the battle over again every time they build a school. Is it going to be two buildings? Is it going to be single-sex schools, or we're going to build a co-ed school? And I've been in New Zealand. The co-educators are still, and the single-sex educators are battling it out all the time. I've read a lot of the literature, and I think you can't say scientifically which produces the stronger academic outcome. I don't think co-ed schools can prove they're better than single-sex, nor single-sex better than co-ed. So what I ultimately advise people is to go to the school and see what seems to work for your kids. I have two children, both adopted. My daughter has the athletic ability I never dreamed of. She was an extraordinary athlete. In fact, two of her teammates on her ice hockey team just played for the U.S. in the Olympics. And she played 4 varsity sports. We had to find, and she was dyslexic. She had a very boy-style brain. And I said to her, do you want to consider a girls' school? And she said, Dad, I play on a boys' soccer team. It's not going to happen. Okay? And off she went to a co-ed high school. And my son, who despises athletics, has never been interested, is a very artsy. I mean, at home, I've got the gender-busting kids. So the stereotype-busting kids, the decisions I've had to make, I would recommend to every parent. You have to go to a school and see what's a fit for your child and what you like and what you can support. Because as a parent, you have to be able to support the school your child is in. Otherwise, your child's in conflict. And we've had that at my boys' school with mothers whose husbands went to Belmont Hill and they wanted their sons to go, but the mothers are freaked out by the all-boy environment and think that we're going to produce Neanderthals. And that's hard for a boy. And so I come down in this place of fit and values.
Good. Okay, we're now going to have questions. So I'm going to start in the front and work our way back. I'll try and get as many as I can in. If somebody has a question, could they put their hand up? We have somebody here. Quick, right? Run. You haven't got the right shoes on. Yes.
Hi. As a follow-up to the question about the single-sex versus co-ed schools, just if you had no restrictions, what would you actually tell Kevin's parents if there were no sort of socioeconomic? Where would he be happier, you think? If you, instead of being in the co-ed environment that he was actually always getting into trouble, would you, if he could, would you recommend to his parents that he might be happier in a single-sex school?
What was interesting about Kevin was this: he'd had 2 very bad years, and the Melrose public school system had been trying to get his parents to put him on medication. To their credit, they let us film him. We asked them to nominate a boy who was right on the edge of what they could handle. And he is a handful, as his teacher said, but his parents wouldn't do it. And this class was boy-dominated. So the principal had brought in a male teacher, and Kevin and a number of other boys were then doing much better. What does that suggest? That he should be shipped off to an all-boys school, or that he have more male faculty members in his life, that maybe they reinstitute a second and a third recess, because the boys at Peg's son's schools are doing splendidly academically, but they have meaningful breaks during the day. Okay? Their academic performance stays high. I'm somebody who believes if we gave children more undirected free play and more breaks, they would in fact do better in school. I run into a wall of fear in school. So I can't say absolutely that Kevin would be happier in a boys' school, but this I know: nobody would be appalled by Kevin. At my boys' school, I showed this film to 420 boys, and they all said, "Oh, I'm just like Kevin. I was just like Kevin." They completely identify him with an 80% male faculty. The things that are often alarming about a Kevin are not alarming to men.
Right, questions in the front? I mean, yes, I think there's a... is there one here? Yeah, please. And then we'll get a mic up there.
I'm just wondering, for young children, when they show this predilection, young boys, I should say, when they show this predilection to roughhousing and aggressive play, what is the right thing to do? Is it right to encourage them, let them just do that, or is it right to try to rein them in and control their behavior?
Take a shot. You're a parent.
You're the psychologist.
Yeah, you're the psychologist.
The one thing I would say about what we actually give that a name, rough and tumble play, and it is the most robust and reliable sex difference across all the animal phyla, that males engage in play, juvenile males, in play more frequently and with more aggressive contact, and that's in puppies and kittens, polar bears, monkeys, and humans. So it's a very natural part about their play. I think for me the fear is, though, in our society we have all of this pseudo violence that they're exposed to with these video games, and so it's a matter of making sure that it's kept in the context of play, and it's not about hurting each other, kind of thing, and it's not about domination that is of a unnatural sort. I mean, I agree about the idea that males are born to dominate. I mean, that's what they're there for, is to, because we have hidden ovulation, they actually have to protect the females and things like that, and so it's what they're geared for. So I think that any effort, frankly, to suppress that behavior would be futile. And so it's more about making sure it's channeled in a healthy, positive way, that they can wrestle, and at the end they stand up and shake hands, and then they'll wrestle again tomorrow.
I find moms who never had brothers are more alarmed than others, and when I ask them, they're often afraid that they won't grow up to be friends. My brother and I tried to kill each other every day. I just flew to Chicago for his birthday party on Saturday. We're extraordinarily close. The fears of women that this kind of thing, because this kind of thing might have a different meaning if it occurred between girls. But boys love to touch each other. They love to wrestle. If you can't stand it, go to another room.
Right, I think we had some questions. Yeah, whoever's waving most vigorously, I think.
Yes, I'm questioning about the advent of technology. I mean, obviously all of us are very concerned about the mediocre level of our standing in the world and education, and a lot of people have been proposing technology as a means of trying to address some of this. I wonder if that's something that, in the boy-girl issue, is a means of really constructively dealing with this.
Well, they're all heavily involved in technology, from texting and video games. But boys are the video game leaders, and if you measure screen time, it's the boys who are the heaviest users. Certainly 14, 15, 16-year-old boys, many of them are up in 42 plus hours a week on screens. And much of their social life is involved. Many boys feel they're living a much broader world on World of Warcraft. They're talking to people in Australia, and they actually feel they're inhabiting a larger world than their kind of stifling school, and they will make a persuasive argument. But as boys grow up and they see their future and they develop more future orientation, they tend to balance out, at least the boys at my school do, unless, of course, Call of Duty has come out at midnight, in which case we have a school full of exhausted boys, all saying what level they got to, because they were playing all night. And you don't get that phenomenon in girls. The South Koreans are attempting to teach more advanced math concepts using video gaming. I think the sensible thing is to harness the really compelling aspects of technology and video gaming, which has its addictive aspects, and to harness it educationally. Why would we not go with what is an extraordinarily powerful tool?
Yeah, I'll just say one anecdotal comment. When I took my 9-year-old son to the pediatrician and he said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" He said, "The CEO of Apple." I said, "Great, honey, you go for it."
We have a question in the middle, I think.
Your question about coeducation, I read somewhere that high school should really have boy-girl separate education, but that's neither here nor there. But my question is, what are the effects of left-handed and right-handedness on the brain? You haven't mentioned homosexuality. And my last thing is, I grew up with 3 brothers and 3 sisters in a small house. My mother was English and taught in the Montessori system, and she always said, if you're going to fight, fight outside. So my questions are...
You want to do the left-handed?
This is an eclectic combination. Which one do you want?
I can't, biological basis of homosexuality. Is there a biological basis? Undoubtedly. Do we understand the basis of it? Absolutely not. At this point, it's very difficult to model in our animals because we have to do tricks like treat them with hormones. The only naturally occurring animal model system I know now of homosexuality is in the sheep, and work by Chuck Roselli, and he's shown that about 10% of male rams prefer to mount other male rams, and they completely ignore the females, and that's without any manipulations whatsoever. And he sees differences in their brains and things, so that there's clearly something biological, but it's very early days on that. But just what we know of the human data tells us it's not cultural. That there's the things like there's so many variables that can contribute to it that seem to be biological and not cultural. But how that's happening, we just don't know yet.
I don't need to add to that. It's great.
Left-handedness?
I don't know anything about left-handedness and right-handedness.
Yeah, I mean, it's a differently wired brain, and it's more the true left-hander, because there's the really split, reverse brain left-hander. It is more prevalent in males, substantially more. And as I said, this male brain is being wired in an environment of high hormones. And so what I didn't articulate well was when I think that the male bias towards developmental disorders of wiring is because this is a fast-moving train, and then you have these steroids coming along, that are pushing it along even faster, so it can derail easier. And so it's more likely to derail, whereas the female is chugging along just fine, rather slowly, and there isn't any other influences to push her off track. It's sort of, the female brain is the default, quote, brain. It's still an active developmental process, but in the absence of hormones, the brain will become female.
As for playing outside, we have such a frightened generation of parents that they won't send their children outside. And I think that's changed the lives of boys dramatically, and girls, but boys maybe more.
I think we've only got time for one more question. Dr. Sackmeyer.
Thanks. This was a fascinating program, and I just want to ask a question about our environment and chemical contaminants in the environment, and the issue of the contaminants that have unique endocrine activity, including the byproducts from plastics and so forth that are getting into the food chain, and even in infants and young children, are they being exposed to exogenous agents that may be influencing these developmental factors?
It's a very serious and legitimate concern, because as I was just saying, how important these hormonal effects are on the developing brain, and endocrine disruptors are going to disrupt that or mimic it. And there's a lot of good data in animal models showing that if we expose them to bisphenol A and various fungicides and things, that we can very much disrupt these normal brain developmental processes. So yeah, I think there's serious cause for concern that we need to get those things out of our environment. I will say Maryland is one of the first states that's going to ban the use of BPA in any plastics, and we need to have much, much more of it going forward, because they're everywhere.
Leonard Sachs, in his book Boys Adrift, makes a very strong case that he thinks boys' motivation is being undermined by these substances, and that we're seeing those effects played out in school.
We've had a great discussion, a great couple of talks. Thank you, Peg. Thank you, Michael.